Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final week of the 2025 Hot Topics in Environmental Law Summer Lecture Series. I'm Christophe Courchain, the Faculty Director of the Environmental Law Center and Associate Dean for Environmental and Experiential Programs here at Vermont Law and Graduate School. Each of our talks is worth one Vermont CLE credit, so please keep track of which talks you attend for your records. We'll have time for Q&A after today's presentation, and for those of you watching live on VLGS YouTube, you may enter your questions in the chat space on the right-hand side of the page at any time, and we'll get through as many as we can. Today, we're pleased to welcome David Talbot. David is a full professor at the National School of Public Administration, or École nationale d'administration publique, ENAP, with over 15 years of experience in teaching and research. His work focuses on sustainable and responsible management, particularly in the areas of climate governance, carbon neutrality, and the evolution of environmental performance in public and private organizations. He's made significant contributions to the integration of sustainable development principles into governance mechanisms and policy evaluation frameworks. In addition to his academic role, Professor Talbot has held several leadership positions, including scientific advisor on sustainable development and director of ENAP's doctoral program. He collaborates closely with governments, municipalities, and civil society organizations to support the design, implementation, and assessment of climate action strategies. His research has helped advance public policy and guided organizations in developing innovative and accountable responses to climate change. He holds a master's in public administration from ENAP and a doctorate in management from Laval University. Professor Talbot joins us at VLGS this week and next as part of his sabbatical, and we're pleased to welcome him to campus. Today, he will present on carbon pricing issues and challenges. Please join me in welcoming David Talbot.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you as well for the invitation to participate in this speaker series on current issues in environmental law. Today, I will be discussing carbon pricing, what is it, how it's work, and why it's become one of the most widely used policy tools for reducing greenhouse gas emission. We take a closer look at the evolution of system in Europe, Quebec, Canada, and California, and reflect on what the evidence tells us about their performance and also future prospect. Before we dive into the specific, let me start with a quick overview. Carbon pricing works by putting a financial cost on emission, essentially making polluters pay for the damage the emission cause to the environment and society. The goal is to create a strong economic incentive to cut emission and to encourage investment in cleaner, low-carbon technologies. In addition to driving decarbonization, carbon pricing also generates public revenue, which can be reinvested in climate mitigation, adaptation, or social equity initiatives. In this presentation, I'll walk you through three key components. First, we take a closer look at what carbon pricing is and how it's works. Then we explore lessons from European Union Emission Trading System, ETS, the world's largest and most established carbon market. After that, we turn to two promising North American examples, so California cap and trade system and its linked counterpart in Quebec, both part of the Western Climate Initiative. So let's begin with the fundamentals of carbon pricing. As of 2025, there are 80 active carbon pricing instruments worldwide, 43 carbon taxes, and 37 ETS programs. These instruments collectively cover approximately 28% of global greenhouse gas emission. representing around 15 gigaton of CO2 equivalent. We are seeing notable progress in emerging economies with the adoption of different carbon pricing. China, for example, expand its national ETS to encompass high-emitting sectors, including cement, steel, and aluminum. India and Brazil are developing their own national ETS framework, reflecting a growing recognition of carbon pricing as an effective climate policy instrument. This expansion signals increased global alignment on carbon pricing as part of a broader climate governance framework. There are two main ways to price carbon: a carbon tax or an ETS. But what is the difference between these two mechanisms? A carbon tax sets a stable and predictable price per ton of CO2, making it easier for businesses to plan and for government to administer. It is straightforward to implement and generate significant public revenues, which can be used to support vulnerable households or invest in low carbon technologies. Carbon tax are in place in countries such as Canada, Colombia, Denmark, and South Africa. However, a carbon tax does not guarantee a specific level of emission reduction. It's only provide an incentive proportional to the costs imposed. By contrast, an emission trading system sets a fixed cap on total emission and allows the market to determine the price through trading of allowance. This ensures that the maximum emission level is achieved, which is particularly useful for meeting specific climate targets. ETS programs are more flexible and better suited to sectors that are exposed to international competition because they can include free allocation to mitigate competitiveness risks. But an ETS can lead to volatile and uncertain price, which can make planning more difficult for businesses. ETS systems are operating in the European Union, China, and United States. According to AIDS and all in 2024, both instruments are effective but partial solution. Carbon tax are better at broad-based coverage and revenue generation, while ETS are more appropriate for capping emission in high-emitting, trade-exposed sectors. Combining the two can create a more robust and balanced climate policy package. So let's now look at some of the key trends and ongoing challenges in carbon pricing. In 2024, global carbon pricing mechanism generate over 100 billion in revenue, a significant milestone that highlight the growing adoption of these policies worldwide. However, despite this progress, carbon pricing remains insufficient to meet global climate goals. Many current carbon prices are still below the level recommended to achieve net zero emission by mid-century. This gap underscores the need to strengthen existing systems and implement more ambitious policies. One encouraging trend is the broader sector coverage being implemented in several jurisdictions. Governments are increasingly extending carbon pricing to hard-to-abate sectors, such as transportation, building, and agriculture. Another important development is the implementation of mechanisms to prevent carbon leakage. This is the risk that emission simply shifts to jurisdiction with a carbon price, without the carbon price, undermining the global effort. At the same time, this development highlights the challenge for jurisdiction like the United States, where carbon pricing policies remain fragmented across states rather than uniform nationwide. This lack of harmonization creates uncertainty and competitive disadvantage for American companies exporting to regions with stringent carbon pricing, such as the European Union. U.S. firms in trade-exposed sector risk of facing higher costs and reduced competitiveness if they are subject to border adjustment while operating in regulatory environment with inconsistent carbon signal. Finally, we can also see that carbon price vary significantly across jurisdictions. For example, in 2024, the price per ton of CO2 was about $42 on the Quebec cap and trade system, around $29 in California, over $100 in European Union, and just over $23 under the regional greenhouse gas initiative in the northeastern US. These disparities reflect different policy designs and political contexts, but they also illustrate the need for greater alignment and cooperation over time. Importantly, many experts consider a carbon price of at least $40 per ton to be a minimum threshold for effectively stimulating low carbon innovation and making meaningful progress toward the Paris Agreement target. Price below this level may fail to create strong enough incentive for businesses and government to achieve deep emission reduction. In the present case, the California is quite below this level. Therefore, moving toward a more consistent and sufficiently high carbon price is essential to ensure both fairness and effectiveness in global climate action. Oh, so let's take a closer look at the history of the European Union ETS and how it's evolved into the broader framework we see today, including the carbon border adjustment mechanism. The European Union emission trading system, launched in 2005, is the world's first multinational carbon market and remains a cornerstone of European climate policy. Phase one was a pilot phase, covering major emitting sectors like power generation and heavy industry. However, as Lang et al. In 2014 points out, this first phase revealed significant design flaws, notably over-allocation of allowance and lack of demand during the financial crisis caused carbon price to collapse, undermining incentive. During phase two, 2008 to 2012, the ETS aligned with the European Union Kyoto Protocol commitment, but still struggle with low price and surplus allowance. To address these issues, the European Union introduced significant reform in phase three between 2013 to 2020, including a shift from free allocation to auctioning and the creation of a market stability reserve, MSR, to absorb surplus permit and stabilize the market. Today, the ETS is in phase 4, which align with the European Green Deal. The cap now declined by 4.3% annually, a much steeper trajectory than before. As the ETS nature it's inspired other system in China, California, and elsewhere, showing its global influence as a prototype for carbon market. European policymakers also realized that the ETS alone could not prevent some challenges like carbon leakage, where emissions simply shift to imports from least regulated regions, undermining European effort and hurting competitiveness. This led to the adoption of the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, the CBAM, in 2023, with implementation set to begin in 2026. CBAM extends the carbon price signals to import of carbon-intensive goods like steel, cement, and electricity. Importers will pay the equivalent carbon price, ensuring that foreign producers don't have unfair advantage and preventing the integrity of the European Union climate action. By linking the EU ETS to trade policy, CBAM, the European Union has taken a pioneering step toward ensuring its climate policy remain effective in a globalized economy, showing how carbon pricing can be both a domestic and an international tools for decarbonization. This diagram summarizes the main expectation and concern surrounding emission trading system. On the left side, we have 3 major concerns that have emerged over time. The first is market stability and allocation issues. In the early phase, over-allocation of allowance and price volatility weakened the carbon price signal, creating uncertainty for long-time investment. The second concern is carbon leakage. So the risk that industry relocate production to countries with no or lower carbon costs, which would reduce European Union emission on paper, but not globally. And finally, competitiveness, the fear that higher carbon costs could hurt the global competitiveness of European industries, especially in trade-exposed sector, again, like steel, cement, and aluminum. On the right, we see the 3 key expectations that policymakers and stakeholders have for such a system. First, emission reduction. The ETS is expected to deliver measurable and enforceable reduction in greenhouse gas emission, aligned with carbon target. Second, stimulate innovation. By putting a price on carbon, the ETS should create incentive for businesses to invest in low carbon technology and processes. And third, finance the transition to auction revenues. The ETS can generate funding to support, for example, renewable energy deployment, adaptation measure, and social equity program. The expectation and concern we just reviewed are not purely theoretical. They have been examined extensively in the academic literature over the past 2 decades. In the next part of this presentation, I walk you through each of these points one by one and discuss what we actually know from empirical studies. This will give us a more nuanced and evidence-based understanding of the ETS success and also the shortcomings. Let's start with the first major concern. The first major concern, the market stability and allocation issues. As highlighted in several studies, the European Union ETS faced significant challenge in its early phases due to over allocation of allowance and weak price signal. The pilot phase 1, 2005-2007, was characterized by a very generous free allocation of allowance. So generous, in fact, that emissions were lower than the cap, causing carbon price to collapse to near zero level in 2007. Sato et al. In 2022 describe how the EU ETS allocation rules have been central to its political economy. In the early phase, allowance were handed out based on past emission, a system called grandfathering. This helps secure support from industry, but it's also lead to windfall profits, creates strong lobbying pressure to maintain free allocation, and further contribute to the surplus of permits. In phase 2, between 2008 to 2012, the ETS aligned with Kyoto Protocol targets, but it was hit hard by the global financial crisis, which lowered industrial output and demands for allowance. This again creates a surplus of permits, driving price down and undermining confidence in the market. This allocation issue not only depress price, but also erode the credibility of the ETS as an effective climate policy tool. To address these flaws, the European Union introduced a series of reforms in phase 3 between 2013 to 2020, including a more stringent cap and greater reliance on auctioning rather than free allocation. The most notable change came in 2019 with the implementation of the Market Stability Reserve, designed to absorb surplus allowance and restore balance to the market. Overall, the literature clearly shows that allocation practice and market design flaws in the early years create volatility and uncertainty, which delay investment in low carbon technology and weaken the ETS impacts. The reform since 2013 have stretched the system, but allocation remain a delicate balancing act between efficiency, fairness, and leakage protection. The second major concern is carbon leakage. For reminder, carbon leakage refer to a situation where production and truss emission shift to region with no or much weaker carbon pricing. This means global emission remain uncharged while European industry lose competitiveness. Um, the early fears of massive leakage under the EU ETS have not materialized as fully as initially anticipated. Empirical study suggests that so far the risk has been moderate and concentrate in specific sectors. To mitigate this risk, the European Union grant free allowance to industry identified as being at high risk carbon leakage. While this has reduced relocation incentive, it has also weakened the carbon price signal to those sectors. Looking ahead, the European Union is introducing the carbon border adjustment mechanism, CBAM, starting in 2026. As Hope and Hall in 2023 explained, CBAM will apply the European Union carbon price to import of carbon-intensive goods, leveling the playing field and preserving the integrity of European Union climate policy. Overall, carbon leakage remains an important concern, but evidence so far suggests it can be managed throughout careful policy design and international coordination. The third major concern is competitiveness. Carbon pricing inevitably increases production costs for energy-intensive and trade-exposed sectors. The risk that European producers will lose market share to competitors from regions with weaker or no carbon pricing. This concern is closely linked to carbon leakage, but it also refers to the broader ability of European Union industry to remain profitable and invest in decarbonization. Industry often argue that higher costs undermine their competitiveness in global market. This is particularly problematic in the absence of a level playing field globally, where some countries don't impose comparable carbon costs. And as for it's the same situation as carbon leakage, competitiveness risk remain a key policy challenge, and the European Union ETS continue to adapt to strike the right balance between environmental ambition and economic sustainability. Yeah, the first major expectation of the EU ETS is to deliver emission reduction. Since its introduction in 2005, emissions from stationary installation covered by ETS have declined by approximately 48%, according to official European Union data. This decline has been driven by several factors. The rising carbon price, which has strengthened the economic signal to reduce emission, changing fuel price that accelerate the shift away from coal, and complementary renewable energy policy that have decarbonized much of the power sector. Other factors have also played a role, including lower energy demand, significant reduction in industrial output, and global events such as the 2008 economic crisis and the COVID-19 pandemics. Notably, the most recent data showed that emissions from stationary installation decreased by 217 megatons of CO2 equivalent in 2023 alone. 17% drop compared to 2022. It's the largest annual reduction since the ETS was launched. However, despite this achievement, the evidence suggests that the ETS alone remain insufficient to align with the Paris Agreement long-term goal. As Green in 2021 note, the system early years saw only modest annual reduction of around 0 to 1.5%. Carbon pricing worked best when combined with regulatory and innovation policies as part of a broader policy mix. In short, while the ETS has delivered substantial emission cuts, further strengthening of its design and integration with harder policies will be needed to meet the European Union climate ambition. Let's now turn to another key expectation of the European Union ETS, its ability to stimulate innovation. One of the core arguments in favor of carbon pricing mechanism is that they create a predictable economic signal that incentives companies to invest in cleaner technologies and processes. By putting a price on carbon, the European Union ETS is expected to stimulate research, development, and deployment of low carbon technologies across industries. Empirical evidence show that the EU ETS has indeed contributed to technological change. The problem is the discussion is more about the nature of this effect and the magnitude of this effect. As Hope and all in 2023 note, the rising carbon price has increased pressure on firms to improve efficiency and adapt existing mitigation technology. Similarly, Bojesi and all in 2023 argued that the ETS encourage learning by doing, especially in the power sector, and help diffuse innovation already available on the market. More systematically, Chen and all in 2024 provide a meta-analysis of 78 empirical study on carbon market and innovation. They found that both the EU ETS and also the China's pilot scheme have produced positive and statistically significant innovation effect, measured in investment patterns and technology adoption. However, this effect remains moderate and uneven, so limited by factors such as regulatory uncertainty and sufficient stringency of the cap and sector-specific differences. In particular, innovation effects are stronger in electricity generation than in sectors such as pulp and paper, and are more visible in incremental improvement than in radical or transformative innovation. Chen and all in 2024 conclude that while the ETS can effectively stimulate innovation at the margin, it is not sufficient on its own to drive the transformative change need to meet long-term climate goals. Complementary policies such as targeted subsidies, R&D support, and stricter standards are needed alongside carbon pricing to unlock the innovation potential fully. Finally, An essential expectation of the EU ETS is its ability to help finance the transition to a low carbon economy. Unlike earlier phase that rely heavily on free allocation, phase three of the ETS, so starting in 2013, introduced large-scale auctioning of allowance. This change turned the ETS into not only a regulatory instrument, but also a significant source of public revenues for climate action. In 2023 alone, auctioning revenues total approximately 43 billion euros, setting a new record. Of this, about 33 billions went directly to member state budget, and the remaining found approximately 7 billion euros were channeled into two key European Union level programs, so the Innovation Fund and the Modernization Fund. These revenues are used to finance a range of projects. So, for example, supporting renewable energy deployment, improving energy efficiency in building and industries, fostering innovation in industrial decarbonization, and providing assistance to vulnerable households and regions to ensure a just transition. This financial dimension of the ETS is crucial to making the transition socially acceptable and politically feasible. Revenues enable governments to cushion the impact on workers and industries while accelerating investment in clean technologies. That said, research and audit have shown that the use of ETS revenues is not always fully aligned with climate goal. This is a big challenge. Allocation remain uneven across member states, and significant portions of the revenues are still used for unrelated budgetary need rather than climate investment. European Union ETS shows that a well-designed carbon market can serve as a cornerstone of climate policy, combining environmental integrity, economic efficiency, and social support for the transition. It's provide valuable lesson for other jurisdiction seeking to implement or improve carbon pricing mechanism. So now I will talk about the Quebec and California cap and trade system. Let's begin with the historical context. Both systems were developed between 2008 and 2011 under the Western Climate Initiative and officially launched in 2013. And this is creating the first cross-border carbon market in North America. They cover an impressive 85% of emission in 8 jurisdictions, including electricity generation, large industrial facilities, and fuel distribution. A distinguished feature of this program is that they are designed not just to reduce emission, but also to generate significant revenue that is earmarked for climate action. In Quebec, all proceeds from allowance auction go into the Green Fund, which has collected over 6 billion Canadian dollars since 2013. This fund is used to finance public transit, building retrofits, clean energy, and climate adaptation projects. Similarly, California channel is its auction revenues into the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, GGRF, which has raised over 24 billion US dollars since 2013. The GGRF support projects such as high-speed rail, affordable housing near transit, and programs to benefit disadvantaged communities. This dual focus on emission reduction and climate finance has made this program a central part of climate policy in both jurisdictions and a reference point for other regions exploring market-based mechanisms. So let's now discuss how cap and trade program have actually performed in terms of emission reduction and how allocation practices have influenced their effectiveness based on empirical evidence from California and Quebec. In California, according to Lessman and Kramer in 2024, the electricity sector has shown a strong performance. Emission in this sector fell by about 48% between 2005 and 2019, compared to a counterfactual scenario. This is an average annual reduction of 6 to 7%. This success was largely driven by complementary renewable energy policy and fuel switching away from coal and oil. By contrast, the industrial sector in California did not experience similar progress. In fact, emissions were found to be about 6% higher than the counterfactual. This disappointing result is explained by overly generous free allocation of allowance and higher abatement costs in heavy industry, which weakened the carbon price signal and delayed investment for its different enterprise. Examining Quebec, I found in my study that regulated industrial facility reduced emission by approximately 9.8% between 2013 and 2015, compared to similar plants in the rest of Canada. However, this came at the cost of a 6.8% drop in employment and only a modest improvement in carbon intensity, just 3.7%. This result suggests that companies primarily scaled back production rather than investing in clean technology or innovation. Taken together, this finding highlights that while cap and trade system can deliver measurable GHG emission, particularly in the electricity sector, their effectiveness in industry has been limited by allocation practices and weak innovation incentives. This underscores the importance of complementing carbon market with sector-specific policies and stricter cap trajectories to drive more ambitious and also sustainable reduction. To conclude, let's summarize the key lessons from the Western Climate Initiative experience in Quebec and California. First, our cap and trade system can deliver real and measurable emission reduction. In California, the electricity sector alone cut emission by about 48%, while in Quebec, industrial plant cut emission by nearly 10%, compared to similar plants elsewhere in Canada. Second, the Western Climate Initiative showed that complementary policies are critical. California's success in the electricity sector was largely due to renewable energy mandate and fuel switching, whereas in Quebec, reduction came more from scaling down production than innovation, showing weaker incentives to invest in cleaner technology. Third, their experience highlight the importance of allocation design, cap stringency, and reinvestment. Over allocation of free allowance, the same problem than European Union at the beginning, and lenient cap in the early years undermined the carbon price signals. Reforms have strengthened the system, but challenge remain. Importantly, both Quebec and California have used auction revenues to fund green initiatives through their respective climate funds. But the performance and measurable impact of these funds on emission, innovation, and equity are still insufficiently assessed. So overall, cap and trade serve as a powerful foundation for climate policy, but its effectiveness depends on strong cap, complementary policies, and robust evaluation of reinvestment to ensure environmental and social outcome. So thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, it would be my pleasure to respond.
Thank you so much, David. That was extremely helpful overview of where we've been and where we are in this universe of carbon pricing in the jurisdictions that are deeply engaged in it and have been working on policy design for now decades at this point. It's a timely topic in part. This is a sort of momentous day in U.S. climate policy as the administration is issuing a proposal today to revoke the EPA's endangerment finding. So it's a very timely topic for all of us to be thinking about climate policy. I'll say that we are very interested in having questions and comments from the audience online who's watching us live. So you can, if you are online and watching us, please jump in and share your question or comment in the chat, which is on the right-hand side of your page. And we'll try to get to as many as we can. But I'll sort of start, David, with kind of the context for these policies have been fairly durable, the ones that you've described, in terms of being in place long enough so that we actually do have some empirical information that you presented. What sort of socio-political factors would you attribute to the fact that these policies have remained in place while other efforts to enact carbon pricing around the world have been, I think, more challenged and more challenging for policymakers?
Yeah, that's a good question because recently in Canada, the political context evolved rapidly. And during the last electoral campaign, for example, a lot of different candidates push for example, eliminate carbon tax in BC. And for me, it's really bad because BC it's one of the best case scenario. It's the best of class in the carbon tax because yes, it's true. This can have an impact on employment. Yes, it's true, but you can create new employment in clean technology. And one study of Yamazaki just demonstrate this. It's possible to create a new economy and replace the different employment and different challenge. For me, one of the biggest challenge is the political will, because BC retract with the carbon tax, but Quebec government don't move. and they continue their commitment to climate policy. And for me, it's the most important thing. And for the BC, it's the worst scenario for me because this evolution took 20 years of very good evolution of this text. Because the goal of this presentation is also to demonstrate it's a work in progress. It's very difficult to have the perfect ETS system, but with different reform, it's possible to continue to improve the process, improve the efficiency of the mechanism.
So we sort of have a challenging context for these sets of policies around the world politically. I guess the question is if, based on the European and the WCI experience so far, and thinking about the other policies like RGGI, which is in place here in New England and the Northeast, if you were advising policymakers in an area that has not yet implemented carbon pricing or a trading system, what are the one or two things that you would say to that policymaker? Focus on this, get this right, because that will help make this policy effective.
Yeah, it's really funny because actually in the state, with the relation between Canada and the state, it's always about the borders tax, the border. And my first advice is what's happened actually in European Union for 2026. This have more consequences for your local industry if you export products than doing nothing, because it's important to have a more uniform or more global system with more equivalent, because price, it's a good signal. But after it's the level of the price, it's the other signal. Because I talked about the Quebec and California, and the price isn't good enough now. It's more $18. We need to reach the 100,000 by ton. It's the 100. It's the target. So for me, it's important to do something now to only for the border adjustment mechanism. It would be the same for the different countries soon. So it's important to react.
Looking ahead in the European Union, I've seen some commentary that the sort of border adjustment mechanism that's in place there, and it has some serious limitations in terms of what's covered, and so I wonder what you sort of think would be helpful there as we take lessons from that. What are the lessons learned from the Europeans' efforts to put that in place, and having also to make it a relatively modest policy in terms of the amount of teeth that it has across the economy.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem is always the same. It's the heavy industry. So it's the cement industry, it's the steel industry, it's the aluminum industry. But honestly, I work with this sector, oh my God, near 20 years ago with in my thesis. And normally those companies prefer to have a price to be, and after with this price, it's possible to do some modelization, to do some measurement, to okay, what is the best investment we can do to better perform or to reduce GHG emission? And now the problem is this company are mondial or global, and we have only regional plan or regional law or regional obligations for carbon pricing. And this is for me the biggest challenge, is to convince everyone to go in this direction. And because it's probably impossible. For example, in Canada, the Canada government tried to reach the carbon neutrality for 2050. And for me, now, I don't know how it can do this because you need to better mobilize AV industry and also, and it's why I talk a lot about the reinvesting. How you use the money, how do you use the revenues? And if you use this to transform the economy, for me, it's possible to reach a different goal. And to help, also to help this company to do the transition. Uh, I remember the famous BP slogan, Beyond Petroleum. It's similar for me. So, what you can do to help different companies in high exposure company in the transition. So with this money, it's possible to help different subsidies program. For example, in Quebec, for me, the best investment is in the public transport, public transit. It's possible to invest in public transit and have a lot of multiplication of the reduction. So the reduction of the market is one thing, but the reduction then can be attributed to the indirectly to the market by reinvestment. It's bigger, it's higher. So it's possible to use this as a, but yeah, because your question is good about the limit of the CBAM actually. But for me, CBAM arrived officially in 2026. And after we probably have a reform of the reform of the reform. It's a work in progress. And for me, it's a good model because when Quebec and California adopt the new ETS in 2013, it's impossible to have a zero as a price because we have a minimum price each year, and this price evolves. So we have the assurance that in 10 years, it would be 45 or $48 by ton. So we learned from this experience. And this is, for me, I like the idea of CBAM, but I'm not sure about the effect of CBAM in short terms. But what we see in the past, carbon leakage, okay, it's a possibility, but not we don't see a real effect of this. But for me, this is the most important thing. The fear isn't really if you use the academic literature, it's possible to see only positive at the end. Yes, some challenges, but after the challenge is becoming an opportunity to improve. So for me, if we see this as a work in progress, yeah, I don't see any problem.
Well, I think carbon pricing being a sort of successful work in progress where it's been implemented is a great message on today's very dark climate policy day where the U.S. seems to be stepping back from the regulatory policies that you've identified are really important complements to a pricing strategy. So we sort of appreciate the messaging, the sort of the lessons learned from this experience. We think about how we're going to do it here. Potentially bring this policy back from where it's challenges here in the United States, but we watch other parts of the world implement it and move ahead and continue to work on it. And hopefully we can take some inspiration for that when our policy window for making these types of changes occurs again. But the lessons learned and the empirical lessons learned are so important. So I think we're sort of out of time for today's discussion. We're at 1 p.m. Eastern time. And I want to sort of Thank you very much, David, for your presentation. And remind everyone who joined us online that we have one more of our summer lecture series, Hot Topics in Environmental Law. This Thursday at noon will be our last talk, so we hope to see you then. Thank you so much, David, and have a great day, everyone.